Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of D&D Horror Stories. In today's video, we have a tale about an evil campaign that goes bad, a story about a DM that thinks a woman can't play a woman character properly, and more. But first, here is Ziggy with a very important message.
이 데모입니다. 구독과 좋아요. 야 문자열.
Thanks, Ziggy. But with that said, let's get right into these stories. Players ask a new DM, me, for a serious campaign. They are the opposite of serious. By Reddit user, HumanDLC. We had a Session 0 last week to set expectations. At Session 0, the players agreed that they wanted a serious campaign with a fair amount of roleplay. Their game would be evil aligned, but essentially a suicide squad, after a necromancer brought them back, considering them the less of two evils. I came up with a style of game where they would be rulers of a new city, and emphasized relationships with NPCs would be important, foreshadowing. Overall, they seemed pretty hyped, except for the one new player, emphasizing that since I'm a new DM, I'm going to be trash at DMing. I spent a week watching new DM advice YouTube videos, making art, and everything a nervous new DM does to try to over-prepare. I was expecting with an evil-aligned campaign to see at least some backstabbing, intimidation, and maybe even a bit of murder hoboing. Instead, their interpretation of evil is to just be rude to everyone they meet. The necromancer resurrects them, and they make fun of him for dying to do it. Whatever, he's dead now. He just didn't give them as much information as they could have. They then meet the small city crew assigned to help them. They make fun of the NPC names and character in front of them, joking about killing the NPCs, and then say just kidding when they see them getting nervous, etc. The height of the nonsense was when the two ranged spellcasters, a druid and a necromancer, separated from the party to confront an angry mob attacking the town by walking up in melee range to ask them to stop. They were both anti-charisma loner characters. I gave them an "Are you sure?" and had the mob be confused for a moment to give them a chance to at least back away. Instead, the druid started mocking them. I gave the "Roll initiative," and of course got tons of comments about how imbalanced of a fight it was when all the mob attacked the squishy mages right in front of them. I fudged one roll to keep the druid from going to 0 hit points, since the system we are playing punishes you severely for getting low hit points anyway. His character has stat-reducing injuries that will take 2 in-game weeks to recover from. The rest of the group finally gets there, and find that the fight isn't so bad when you don't frontline the mages. The fight ends when the wife of one of the men in the mob shows up to tell them that they are making a mistake. She is a high-ranking official of the neighboring city and offers to pay a recompense for damages and wants to build a diplomatic relationship with them since she's been tipped off by the necromancer that they are the chosen to save them. The players mock her as well and joke about desecrating the bodies of the dead to her. Obviously, she is horrified, but already invited them to visit her city, where an important quest MacGuffin is. I end the session for the time, and here the players begin to talk about how they are going to get a huge payout from the woman, and how much the city crew is going to help them. If I continue as a serious campaign, the city crew who dislikes them will do minimal work, and the woman, horrified and disgusted by them, is going to stiff them on the money. An armed guard will be following them around the city if they visit, since the high-ranking woman considers them mentally unstable. Since their next session will be pretty gimped, I'm considering messaging them to ask if they would prefer a silly campaign. I'll post an update next week if there is interest or if something else crazy happens. TLDR, group asked for a serious campaign where relationships with NPCs matter, and proceed to mock NPCs in-game to their faces, and squishy mages separate from the group to confront hostiles up close. Update. Sorry for the wait around the update. Because of clashing schedules, we skipped a week. I did what a lot of the comments said and talked to the players. The ones I talked to said they had never heard of a game without near constant jokes from the players. I know this isn't the case. I've played in actual serious campaigns before. I explained why that wouldn't work for being serious, and they disagreed, saying that maybe it could get serious later. In the end, I decided to set up the session towards how they were acting by changing all of the characters into Skyrim NPCs and added a lot of railroad, and they really enjoyed it. The only downside is my excitement has cooled down a lot since I've realized how little they want to roleplay. Oh well, I've written a computer program to handle all the math and have been using canned side quests from the internet. It just feels like watching people play a video game instead of seeing a story unfold. Also, in the spirit of horror, if anything I do is boring for even a minute, everyone's phones come out. First, I do have to say that OP did say that it was an evil campaign, so some characters being general assholes to some NPCs is to be expected. Though, to do it to every NPC is a bit overkill. You would think that some of the evil characters would be calculating and conniving, putting on a front of being nice only to play certain characters like a fiddle to get what they want. Also, what is up with telling a new DM that is going to take their time to craft a game for you to play in, that they're going to be horrible at DMing? Your character is supposed to be the asshole, not you. Anyway, the way things sound, and with that update, I would tell OP to just stop running the game for them, as they don't sound like they appreciate your time. D&D is supposed to be fun for everyone, the Dungeon Master included. And if you, as a DM, are just running on autopilot and aren't excited to play, there is no point. Don't feel obligated to run a game for players that don't take your enjoyment into consideration. Though, that is just this Doge's advice. And before we get into the next one, remember, if you have a story that you would like to be featured in a video, be sure to post it to the D&D Doge subreddit, link it in the comments, or even at me on Twitter. Much like the following story. DM tells girl she can't play a girl properly, forces her to play a boy, then mocks her for having a girly character. Submitted to the D&D Doge subreddit by Reddit user Sophie Solborn. Hi all. So this is my wife's story, which I asked to share since she doesn't do Reddit. A few years ago now, when I was newer to tabletop RPGs, I was poking around Roll20s looking for a game to play. I'd played for about a year by that point, but only with one group, and they were pretty great guys, and they let me do basically anything I wanted character-wise, as long as it wasn't disruptive and fit the general theme of the story. So, eventually, I found this game with a GM saying that he wanted people good at the game, and that he had plenty of games filled with noobs that he was currently GMing, and wanted one with just veteran players. Understandable so far. He also went on about wanting a brief summary of what people as a player were like, their experience, and generally, what sort of character was most likely for them to play. So I figured, why not? And threw an application into his game, since I'd done so to a few others already as well. So this GM, Ken, sends me a message a little while later, and says he picked me to go on to Phase 1 of narrowing down who he wanted to let into his game. Phase 1 consisted of a one-on-one micro session of just roleplay, where he basically just said I saw smoke in the distance and asked what I did. I guess he was trying to see, generally, how I behaved and if I was an agent of pure chaos or something. He asked a random question about who my character for this sudden roleplay thing was, and I said something along the lines of, I don't know, I'm in the forest, so a druid I guess? He asked, guy or girl? So I said girl. Then he asked me what my hair color was. I didn't want to say my own hair, so I just threw out blonde. He then asked me what eye color I had, and I again didn't want to say my own, so I said blue. He scoffed, mumbled perv, and we carried on without more issue. But I was mildly put off by that. A couple days later, Ken contacts me again and says that I passed Phase 1, and could now go on to Phase 2, or a one-shot with the other people who passed Phase 1. It was 2 guys, and we were going to be playing a one-shot that made use of the new classes that had just come out for the game that we played. It was Pathfinder 1st Edition, if curious. The characters were pre-mades, just the iconics of the new classes, and I knew absolutely nothing about them. I can't remember what the other 2 guys played, but I think it was Slayer and Blood Ranger. I thought similarly to them, and decided not to go for one of the complicated new caster classes, and so I picked Swashbuckler, since I'd always enjoyed playing weird fighter builds. Swashbuckler was also one of the few female characters available in the selection. The dungeon went mostly fine, though we struggled on a fight here or there, but we got through the one-shot without too much difficulty in the end. During one part though, Ken had 2 mummies or demons or demon mummies, or something that were disguised in an illusioned room, use a charm on the lot of us. The 2 guys failed their save, and I managed to succeed. They proceeded to walk into the room and vaguely flirt at the woman. Ken then asked what my character thought about that, to which I just responded, I mean, the sight of pretty women is nice, but damn suspicious in the middle of this tomb. I have no idea what's going on though, so I'll just stand here and wait to see what happens. Ken just kind of sighed, wrote something down, and eventually the monsters revealed themselves, and it devolved into combat. At the end of the one-shot, Ken said that we all passed Phase 2, and would be players in his game. He then proceeded to share with us some of his notes, most of which I can't remember, but the ones he said about me was that I needed to be less shy, and have a character that isn't so passive or overly friendly or some such. And that, because of how I acted in the scene with the 2 seductresses, which apparently was purely a thing he made up on the spot, and it was just written in the one-shot to be a fight with mummies or whatever, with nothing else going on. He said I wasn't allowed to play a female, that I couldn't do it right. So I was more than a little ticked and uncomfortable with this man telling me, a girl, that I couldn't girl correctly in his opinion. But for whatever reason, I decided to keep at it with the group. The other 2 guys were pretty decent and seemed alright. Over the next couple days, I handed my character, a gnome earth kineticist, think earthbender from The Last Airbender, that is a boy, but goes around with fiery bows in his hair, and with a tunic that looked a fair bit like a dress. Ken seemed slightly taken aback at the image of my character, but we start the first session regardless. One of the NPCs, the little girl of this guy we were supposed to be meeting, but that has gone missing, immediately becomes some sort of GMPC type of NPC. She starts acting like some weird sort of anime tsundere character, and constantly gives my character shit for the bows in his hair, and the way he dresses. Literally, every time she says something to or about my character, it has to include an insult in some way. I was told not to play a passive character, however, so I, with full effort given to giving my character a Scottish accent, give back just as good as I get. I start off gentle about it at first, but halfway through the second session, I'm just shit-talking her back, with full venom on display. This stupid NPC refused to not follow us into the dungeon, going so far as to make the GM ignore a rather high diplomacy check, and then an intimidation check from us, to get her to stay home instead. So we now have this literal child in the dungeon with us that we have to protect. A dungeon that has gained a reputation as being pretty hard, one of the first fights in particular. There's also only 3 of us. I think 5 is the recommended, and we have no front line. We are a sorcerer, a witch, and a kineticist. We were all casters or ranged. My character had a lot of health, being con-based, and a decent-ish AC, but ranged attacks really don't work well in melee. The GM kept promising that he had another player coming in that he would ask to be a healer or tank, or both, or something. Needless to say, this dungeon isn't going great. We're managing somehow, through a series of tricks, and with us all rotating around who is tanking, and making use of the witch's little amount of healing and debuffs, and my high damage and health pool. The child that the GM has seemed to turn into a GMPC at this point is incapable of being convinced to leave, and has since gained a level in Rogue or something as well, despite her having only almost hitting a single target with a crossbow that she stole from me. I didn't need it anyway, but it was still annoying that she did that. Ken also decides, right before we start fighting a ton of tiny creatures, that he doesn't like the rules for tiny creatures, that they seem weak and unfair for the GM. This honestly is what made me think that this guy had no idea what he was actually doing. This homebrew change he made to the rules suddenly, and without warning as we were rolling initiative, made what was supposed to be a fairly simple, easy-ish, and slightly funny fight into something that downed two of us, nearly killed me if not for a very lucky turn and a potion, got his GMPC heavily injured, and made us all decide we weren't strong enough for this dungeon, as we were. So, with no other option as to our power and ability to defeat the dungeon, we all have a very serious talk about needing to level up and get some very important abilities to our core function. So, we leave town and try to find some bandits to fight to farm XP, like this is Final Fantasy or some shit. I guess the GM wasn't pleased with that, but he prepared a whole thing really fast for us to fight bandits and get some XP. This bandit fight ended up being hilariously difficult, with waves of bandits and layers of archers and hit-and-run melee guys darting around and everything. The two guys go down, again, and the witch ends up actually dying. I managed to drag the sorcerer out of there, and we barely managed to scrape by and get back to town. I think we ended up killing 3 bandits, not enough to get XP to level, and now someone needed to make a new character. At this point, it was us 3 versus Ken, and I was annoyed and mad and ready to beat the shit out of Ken and his stupid face and his stupid NPCs that gave me constant shit. Whoa there, calm down. However, what he did at the end of the 3rd session, the one that ended with us trying to grind bandits, made me decide to say fuck it and leave. He told me, "Alright, the shit with your character, it needs to end. Change how they look, and no more cross-dressing or girly shit. It's super cringe and I don't like it." And that was the last time I spoke with any of them. TLDR, pretentious GM tells a girl she can't play girl characters right, then constantly mocks their male characters for being too girly. This Dungeon Master definitely sounded like he was one of those it's the DM versus player types, with how unbalanced the fight sounded. Also, to dictate what gender a player can play as is all sorts of controlling, and honestly should have been the first red flag. Though I can understand the allure of playing tabletop RPGs, and can understand thinking that it might just be a one-off. Also, OP posted in the comments that the DM allowed one of the male players to play a female character, specifically the witch. So he trusted a male player to properly play a female character, but not the player that was actually female. Good on OP's wife for leaving this game, as things probably would only get worse. But that is all I got for today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may all of your rolls be natural 20s. Until next time.